Welcome, the Lord's chosen. Power doesn't disappear when people doubt you. Power disappears when you start believing them. There's a strange truth people don't talk about enough. Over 70% of the time, those who think they've defeated you are celebrating a version of you that no longer exists. They're popping champagne over an outdated file, while the real you is quietly downloading an upgrade they never saw coming. And that's exactly where this story begins, with people confidently assuming they've won, completely unaware that the plot twist has already started forming behind their backs. What they didn't realize is that you weren't losing, you were learning, you weren't down, you were developing, you weren't silent, you were sharpening, and while they were busy laughing at what they thought was your ending, they accidentally became the background characters of your new beginning. There's something almost hilarious about it too. Humans love premature celebrations. People act like referees in a game that isn't even at halftime yet. They see you pause, breathe, or rethink, and suddenly they're convinced they've secured the trophy. Meanwhile, you're just retying your shoelaces because the second half requires better footing. And that's the energy of this topic. They thought they won, until you reminded them who runs this. Because the truth is, some people only win when you're distracted. Their confidence is built on borrowed time. Their arrogance depends on your absence. And their victory laps are always cut short the moment you step back into the arena with clarity, direction, and a version of yourself that's too evolved for their imagination. This introduction isn't about hype or revenge or loud comebacks. It's about that quiet, undeniable moment when you rise, not to prove a point, but to reclaim your position. That moment when everything about you, your growth, your discipline, your boundaries, your mindset, speaks so loudly that nobody needs a memo to understand. You didn't just return, you returned upgraded. And now, everyone who counted you out is suddenly very, very quiet. Let's get into it. Number 1, you stopped responding to their storyline, so their power collapsed. The moment you stopped participating in their version of the story, everything they built around you started falling apart. People don't realize how much of their confidence depends on your cooperation. They were so used to you defending yourself, explaining yourself, or trying to fix misunderstandings that they mistook your involvement for weakness. They thought your reactions meant they still had influence. So when you finally stopped feeding their assumptions, their power didn't just weaken, it crumbled. Every narrative needs energy to survive. Their storyline needed your responses, your arguments, your confusion, your guilt, your effort. The more you tried to correct the record, the stronger their role in your life felt. But when you stepped back and refused to carry the weight of their version of events, their whole structure became hollow. They were left talking to themselves, trying to convince others of something they couldn't even maintain on their own. The shift happened quietly. You reached a point where explaining yourself felt like volunteering for a job you were never paid for. You realized you didn't owe clarity to people who weren't listening in the first place. You stopped trying to look innocent to people who were committed to misunderstanding you. You stopped being the fuel to their fire. And when the fuel ran out, so did their momentum. What made your move so powerful is that it wasn't revenge, it was evolution. You simply outgrew the need to be understood by people who wanted you boxed in. You walked away from the version of you they kept trying to freeze in time. That's what really broke them. They couldn't update their storyline fast enough to keep up with your growth. By refusing to show up for their narrative, you forced them to face something uncomfortable. Their power only existed when you agreed to play the part they gave you. And since you don't live there anymore, they're left with a script that no longer has a main character. They thought they won, but what they won was an empty story you no longer belonged to. Number 2, they underestimated you because they mistook your restraint for weakness. People love to misread a calm person. The minute you didn't react the way they expected, they labeled you as soft, scared, or incapable. They didn't understand that your quiet wasn't surrender. It was patience. It was strategy. It was the discipline to watch the whole situation unfold before making a single move. The truth is, restraint is one of the most misunderstood forms of strength, and you proved that without trying. Your ability to stay composed made them confident that they had the upper hand. They saw you keeping your distance, taking your time, choosing your words carefully, and they assumed they were winning. They were mistaking emotional maturity for fear and internal clarity for submission. They forgot that some people speak loudly because they have nothing else to offer, while others stay silent because they're processing, evaluating, and preparing for what actually matters. The moment you acted, calmly, decisively, and without drama, it shocked them. Not because you did something extreme, but because you did something effective. They had built this idea of you in their head, an idea that made them comfortable. So when you showed your true capacity, it disrupted everything they believed about the situation. That's the funny thing about underestimating someone. It creates the illusion of dominance right up until reality shows up and corrects the record. Your restraint gave you the advantage they didn't see. While they were wasting energy trying to provoke you, you were gathering information. While they were bragging about having the upper hand, you were strengthening your foundation. While they were convinced you were powerless, you were building power quietly. Real power, the type that doesn't need announcing. When the shift happened, it wasn't dramatic. It was simple. You acted with clarity, purpose, and confidence. And that was enough to reveal how wrong they were about you. They weren't prepared for the person you became, while they were busy celebrating a version of you they invented. In the end, your restraint didn't make you weak. It made you unpredictable. And nothing is more intimidating than a person who can stay calm long enough to choose the perfect moment to rise. Number 3, your growth outpaced their imagination. The most dangerous thing you can do when people are trying to control or define you is to keep evolving while they're still stuck in old assumptions. They thought they knew who you were, and they made decisions, plotted moves, and even celebrated victories based on that outdated version of you. They built their confidence around a snapshot in time, completely unaware that you were already rewriting the script behind the scenes. Growth is silent, relentless, and invisible until it hits with undeniable force. And that's exactly what happened here. While they were busy underestimating you, you were quietly expanding your vision, sharpening your skills, and cultivating a mindset that couldn't be touched by their predictions. Every skill you mastered, every habit you formed, every boundary you strengthened, added layers to a version of yourself they didn't even know existed. They had no blueprint for your evolution, no map to track your movement. They were still fighting yesterday's battle while you were playing a completely new game. The beauty of this kind of growth is that it's almost untouchable. They can criticize, sabotage, or try to anticipate your actions, but if they can't even imagine the next step you're capable of, they are always a few moves behind. It's terrifying for someone who thrives on control, because it forces them to confront the fact that their perception of reality is incomplete, and worse, that you no longer exist within it the way they assumed you did. By outpacing their imagination, you took away their power without a fight. They had no idea how to respond because their entire strategy was based on a false premise. They thought the you they knew was the you they were dealing with. Meanwhile, you were already operating on a level they hadn't conceived, leaving them scrambling to understand what happened. When growth is this profound, it becomes a weapon. It's quiet, invisible, and unstoppable. And the most satisfying part, they never saw it coming. They celebrated a victory that was never theirs to begin with while you were miles ahead, proving in every unspoken move that no one wins against someone who refuses to stay small for anyone's comfort. Number 4, you started moving in silence, but acting with precision. The moment you decided to stop announcing your moves, everything changed. People are addicted to noise. They thrive on drama, updates, and leaks. They like to think they have control because they can see, comment, and react. But when you stepped into silence, you removed their advantage entirely. Silence isn't absence. It's a weapon when paired with strategy. While they were busy analyzing your last words or anticipating your next post, you were already executing plans they couldn't even imagine. Moving in silence doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing everything in the background while the world assumes you're idle. You sharpened your skills, built your opportunities, and aligned yourself with outcomes that only you could see coming. Every action became deliberate, every step intentional, every decision calculated to maximize results without creating noise for people who were waiting to judge or interfere. That's the beauty of precision. It hits hard, fast, and unexpectedly. The difference between noise and precision is brutal. People who rely on chaos to feel in control are blind to subtlety. They expect overreactions, loud confrontations, and dramatic proofs of strength. But precision moves like a shadow. They feel it before they see it, and by the time they notice, it's already done. That's why your silence was terrifying for them. They had nothing to grab onto, no updates to dissect, no leaks to manipulate. Their assumptions were crumbling quietly, but irreversibly. Acting with precision also meant that every move served a purpose. Nothing was wasted on proving a point or seeking validation. You acted with intention, focusing on results instead of reactions, and the impact was immediate. They realized too late that you weren't distracted, you weren't confused, and you certainly weren't powerless. You were calculating, building, and winning in ways that didn't need an audience. Silence plus precision is a combination most people never anticipate. They think absence is weakness, but it's actually strength in disguise. It's the quiet storm that dismantles their narrative while they're busy trying to keep up. And by the time they understand it, the game has already shifted, completely, irreversibly, and on your terms. Number 5, their access to you expired, but their curiosity didn't. There's a unique kind of power in removing yourself from people who thrive on watching, tracking, and judging you. The moment you decided they no longer had access to your life, everything changed. They had relied on updates, messages, glimpses, and reactions to feel connected to your story, and when that access expired, it left them disoriented. They were still curious, still obsessed, still trying to check in, but you weren't there anymore, and that absence is where real dominance begins. Curiosity is a dangerous weakness for anyone who wants control. People who believe they own your attention or your reactions can't handle it when the connection is gone. They suddenly realize they're left with speculation, assumptions, and gaps they can't fill. Every unanswered message, every missed update, every boundary you set became a silent statement. You are no longer theirs to manipulate, interpret, or understand. And the tension it creates is electric, because they don't know your next move, but they're desperate to know. What makes this so devastating is that they can't take it back. You didn't ghost them out of anger or immaturity. You stepped away intentionally, leaving them to deal with the consequences of their own underestimation. Their curiosity became their weakness. Every moment they spent wondering, questioning, or trying to access your life without permission reminded them of how little control they really had. It's like watching someone scramble for sand slipping through their fingers. They can't hold on, no matter how hard they try. Meanwhile, you weren't obsessed. You weren't watching them. You weren't wasting energy proving anything. You simply existed in your own life, moving forward, building, growing, and living according to your own rules. And that contrast is what really stung. They thought access meant power. You proved it doesn't. Power isn't about being seen or monitored. It's about being untouchable, unreachable, and completely unbothered. By the time they realized it, the game had already shifted. Their curiosity remained, but their influence evaporated. They were left with nothing but questions, and you were left with everything they thought they could control. That's how absence becomes dominance, and curiosity becomes their cage. Number 6, you stopped competing with people who aren't even in your lane. The moment you realized some people were never your rivals, everything changed. For years, you might have been measuring yourself against people who didn't even matter, people whose lives, goals, and energy had nothing to do with your path. You tried to prove points, win approval, or defend your position against people who weren't even playing the same game. And while you were busy burning fuel on a race that wasn't yours, your real potential was quietly building in the background. Stopping the competition meant reclaiming your energy and focus. It wasn't arrogance, it was clarity. You recognized that comparing yourself to others or trying to win against them was a trap. Their lane is theirs, their pace is theirs, and their victories are theirs. And the second you stopped letting them set the standard for your life, you regained a power that was always yours, but had been diluted by unnecessary battles. This shift is subtle but devastating for those who counted on your constant reaction. People who thrived on your overreactions, your envy, or your attempts to compete suddenly realized they'd lost control. You weren't giving them anything to comment on, to analyze, or to manipulate. By refusing to play their game, you removed the battlefield entirely, and they were left standing on empty ground. The beauty of staying in your own lane is that it forces growth in the directions that matter. Instead of fighting distractions, you start building skills, creating opportunities, and moving toward goals that actually serve you. Your progress becomes invisible to anyone not aligned with your journey, but unstoppable to anyone who truly understands value. You stop being reactive and start being intentional. By stepping out of unnecessary competition, you reminded everyone who thought they had leverage that influence depends on participation. They can't compete with someone who doesn't enter the arena. They can't shake someone who refuses to be shaken. And most importantly, they can't touch someone who is too busy advancing in a direction they can't even comprehend. Your power grew quietly, but unmistakably. And that's the moment they realized who really runs this. Number 7. You started choosing logic over emotional traps. The moment you stopped reacting to every jab, every manipulation, every provocation, everything shifted. People who relied on your emotions to control or distract you were suddenly powerless because you stopped giving them the reaction they craved. They thought your anger, frustration, or hurt was their weapon. But when you started responding with logic instead of emotion, their entire playbook became useless. It's not that they lost interest. It's that their influence vanished the second you refused to fall into the traps they set. Logic is underrated as a form of strength. Most people operate on impulse, ego, and assumption. They depend on predictable responses, and when those responses disappear, they are left scrambling. You learned to pause, evaluate, and respond in a way that wasn't dictated by their chaos. Your mind became the arena where the game was actually being played, and your calm, reasoned approach made them realize they had no advantage. The ones trying to provoke you expected fireworks, but instead they got clarity, and clarity is often more dangerous than any outburst. Choosing logic over emotion also allowed you to see people for exactly who they were. Without emotional fog clouding your judgment, every motive, every lie, every manipulation became visible. You didn't have to guess anymore. The patterns revealed themselves naturally, And once you saw clearly, you could act deliberately, not react blindly. That's what made your moves precise and devastating, without anyone realizing it at first. What's extraordinary is how this shift rewired the entire dynamic. People who thrived on drama or conflict suddenly felt irrelevant, ineffective, and powerless. Their power depended on your engagement, and when your engagement became measured, thoughtful, and intentional, they lost the foundation they relied on. Your silence, patience, and reason became louder than any argument they could throw at you. By choosing logic over emotional traps, you didn't just neutralize their tactics, you elevated yourself above them entirely. They could no longer dictate your energy, your focus, or your decisions. And that quiet, calculated superiority is the moment they realized who truly runs this. Number 8, you became too expensive for their energy budget. People who once thought they could control you eventually realized something simple. Your time, attention, and presence aren't cheap. You became selective, not out of arrogance, but out of necessity. You started valuing your energy the way it deserves to be valued, and suddenly, anyone who thrived on draining it found themselves unable to keep up. You weren't doing less, you were doing smarter. You weren't cold, you were calculating. And that shift made you untouchable in ways they never expected. When you became too expensive, it wasn't about money or material worth. It was about effort. They could no longer rely on easy access, instant reactions, or predictable engagement. Every interaction with you now required respect, intention, and understanding, and that made them uncomfortable. People who once assumed you would bend, explain, or overextend for them suddenly realized that sustaining influence over you came with a cost they weren't prepared to pay. And the fact that they didn't even know how valuable you were until it became obvious is what made it so devastating. The most striking part of this transformation is how quietly it happened. You didn't announce a new standard, you didn't broadcast a boundary, and you didn't over-explain your worth. You simply started prioritizing yourself, your time, your energy, your growth, and your choices naturally filtered out everyone who couldn't meet the standard. They didn't see it coming because they were still operating under the assumption that you were as available, reactive, and malleable as before. By raising the cost of your energy, you reclaimed control without confrontation. You made it clear that your presence isn't a given, it's earned. And as people struggled to adjust to the reality that they could no longer take you for granted, their influence evaporated. You weren't fighting anyone. You simply became a version of yourself that demanded respect. Being too expensive isn't about ego. It's about power, precision, and self-respect. And the moment they realized that they could no longer afford you, that was the moment they understood who really runs this. You became untouchable, not through dominance, but through value that cannot be ignored or replicated. Number 9, you turned pain into a skill set instead of a sob story. The moment you decided to stop feeling sorry for yourself and started extracting lessons from every setback, you transformed pain into power. Most people let hardship define them, creating excuses or building walls that keep them stuck. You did the opposite. Every insult, betrayal, or failure became raw material for your growth. You didn't waste energy crying over what happened. You analyzed it, learned from it, and converted it into skills, discipline, and foresight that no one could take away. That's what made your comeback unstoppable. Turning pain into a skill set is about refusing to let circumstances dictate your story. People thought they could break you, but what they didn't account for is your ability to extract strategy from suffering. Every disappointment taught you patience. Every betrayal sharpened your judgment. Every obstacle refined your approach. By the time they realized you were moving forward, You were already operating on a level they had no understanding of, using the very experiences they thought would weaken you as tools to build your empire. The brilliance of this approach is its silent effectiveness. Pain disguised as growth is invisible to people who want to see weakness. While they were waiting for you to crumble or lash out, you were quietly becoming more resilient, more disciplined, and more precise in every move you made. They couldn't anticipate your progress because it wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was practical, intentional, and unstoppable. By turning pain into a skill set, you also disarmed their tactics. They thrived on your reaction, your doubt, your emotional instability. But when you refused to be a victim and instead became a strategist, they lost their leverage. They had expected weakness and got mastery instead. Their surprise wasn't just in your survival, it was in your evolution. Pain became a catalyst, not a chain. Every setback strengthened your foundation, honed your instincts, and sharpened your clarity. And that's why, when they finally looked at you, they realized they had never been dealing with a person. They had been up against a force, the one who took what was meant to destroy and turned it into undeniable dominance. That's how you reminded them who really runs this. Number 10, you no longer needed validation from people who never valued you. The moment you stopped seeking approval from people who never truly respected or valued you, everything changed. For years, you may have measured yourself against their opinions, trying to prove worth to people who didn't even care. Every compliment you chased, every argument you defended, every expectation you tried to meet, was feeding a system that was never designed to benefit you. When you finally stopped, you reclaimed a kind of power that can't be negotiated or stolen. Validation is an energy drain. People who thrive on your need for approval use it like a lever, pushing and pulling you to their rhythm. They know that as long as you crave their recognition, you remain tied to their agenda, reacting to their whims. But the moment you stop looking to them for reassurance, their influence collapses. They no longer hold the keys to your confidence, your decisions, or your peace of mind. And that realization, it terrifies them more than any confrontation ever could. You began to operate on a different level. You didn't need applause, agreement, or acknowledgement to move forward. Every step you took, every choice you made, every boundary you set was driven by your own standards, your own goals, and your own clarity. And that independence is magnetic. It creates an aura of authority that people instinctively recognize but can't manipulate. The ones who once thought they had leverage over you suddenly realized that their power was an illusion all along. By refusing to chase validation, you also cleared mental space. You weren't distracted by their judgments, their gossip, or their expectations. You could focus entirely on your growth, your strategy, and your vision. That's what made your rise unstoppable and your presence commanding. The real victory isn't in proving them wrong. It's in proving yourself right without their input, without their applause, without their permission. And the moment they see you thriving, unapologetic and untethered from their opinions, they understand the truth. You don't just move forward, you dominate. You remind them who actually runs this, and it has nothing to do with their approval. Number 11, they realized too late that your absence was their downfall. Sometimes the loudest power move isn't confrontation, it's disappearance. The moment you stepped away, withdrew your attention, and exited their orbit, everything shifted. People who thrived on your presence, influence, or reaction suddenly realized how much they had relied on you without ever acknowledging it. Your absence didn't just leave a gap, it exposed the truth. Their victory was built on your participation, and now that participation was gone. They had assumed that by pushing, manipulating, or undermining you, they could secure dominance. They thought their actions would provoke, derail, or unsettle you. What they didn't anticipate was that you were willing to leave their stage entirely. And when you did, they were left scrambling, realizing that their entire sense of control depended on your engagement. That moment is where they see the consequences too late. The game they thought they were winning was collapsing, and the reason wasn't anything they did. It was simply that you refused to stay in their narrative. Absence forces clarity. It removes illusions and exposes weakness. People who never valued you begin to feel the vacuum you leave behind. They start noticing your influence in decisions, conversations, and dynamics they once took for granted. Every plan, every scheme, every attempt to assert control suddenly feels futile, because the one person who unknowingly maintained the balance is no longer present. That delayed realization is devastating for them because it comes without the drama they expected. They aren't losing in a fight. They're losing because you chose not to be part of it at all. Your absence wasn't passive. It was a statement of power. By stepping back, you removed yourself from the patterns they depended on and forced them to confront their own inadequacies. They could no longer manipulate, provoke, or dominate you. They had no choice but to watch from the sidelines as their so-called victory evaporated, all while you continued moving forward, untethered and unstoppable. The ultimate lesson is simple. Sometimes leaving quietly is louder than any confrontation. By removing yourself, you reminded them who really runs this, and by the time they noticed, it was already too late. Number 12. You became immune to the games. They're still playing. The moment you stopped participating in the games people try to play with your mind, you became untouchable. Most of the time, manipulation, gossip, or subtle sabotage only works if you engage. People thrive on reactions, assumptions, and predictable behavior. They design strategies to provoke, unsettle, or control, and they expect you to fall right into the patterns they know. But the second you became immune, completely aware, detached, and unreactive, they lost all leverage. Being immune doesn't mean ignoring the world. It means observing it without being controlled by it. You saw the traps, the lies, the provocations for what they were, and instead of reacting, you acted with purpose. While they were still stuck operating on outdated assumptions and petty tactics, you were moving forward with clarity and precision. Their usual methods of influence, insults, drama, manipulation, became ineffective because you no longer gave them the energy to thrive. What's extraordinary is the way this immunity flips the dynamic completely. People who thought they held power over you realized too late that their strength depended on your participation. They expect volatility, anger, and defensiveness. When you respond with calm, foresight, and indifference, their entire strategy collapses. They can't predict you, they can't provoke you, and they can't control you. That unpredictability is terrifying to someone who built their confidence on your reactions. Being immune also means you reclaimed your mental space. You didn't waste energy proving yourself, defending yourself, or explaining yourself to people who didn't deserve it. That energy went into building, growing, and strengthening yourself. And while they continued to spin their same old games, you were already operating on a higher level they couldn't reach. By the time they realize you're untouchable, it's too late. Their tactics no longer apply, their assumptions no longer hold, and their influence no longer exists. You've stepped beyond their arena entirely. Immunity doesn't just protect you, it demonstrates dominance in a way they can't contest. They thought they had a say in your story, but now they're left powerless, watching someone they underestimated completely take over the game. That's the moment they truly understand who runs this. Number 13. You replaced anger with understanding, and that shift was devastating. The moment you stopped reacting with anger and started responding with understanding, everything changed. Anger is loud, visible, and predictable. People who thrive on control, manipulation, or drama count on it. They expect explosive reactions, overreactions, and emotional fuel to feed their narrative. When you replace that anger with clarity and comprehension, you removed their leverage entirely. Suddenly, their attacks, their provocations, and their attempts to unsettle you no longer had the effect they were built for. Understanding doesn't mean weakness. It means seeing people and situations for exactly what they are, without letting emotions cloud your judgment. You began recognizing their motives, patterns, and limitations. You didn't just see what they were doing, you understood why they were doing it. And that comprehension gave you the ultimate advantage. Instead of being manipulated, provoked, or distracted, you became untouchable, operating on a plane where their chaos could no longer reach you. The effect on them was devastating because it completely flipped the script. They had been counting on you to react, to play their game, to prove them right in your emotional response. When you didn't, they realized they had nothing. Every attempt to stir conflict or gain control bounced off you like a wall. They suddenly saw that their power was never real. It was entirely dependent on your participation. And by stepping into understanding, you made it clear that you were no longer participating. This shift also elevated your own power. Instead of wasting energy on anger, you used it to think, plan, and act strategically. Every decision became sharper, every move more calculated, every boundary more effective. You became calm, precise, and unstoppable, and the people who thought they could shake you were left powerless. Replacing anger with understanding isn't about being passive. It's about mastering your own energy. It's about turning what was once a weakness into a tool for dominance. And the moment they realized you were untouchable, emotionally and mentally, was the moment they understood that their control had ended. You didn't just survive their games, you transcended them, proving who truly runs this. Number 14, you started leading with purpose instead of proving points. The moment you shifted from trying to prove yourself to simply living with purpose, everything changed. For too long, people get caught in the trap of proving themselves to others, showing their right, defending their choices, or validating their worth. But proving points is exhausting, distracting, and ultimately futile. People who thrive on drama, manipulation, or control can always find a way to dispute you. Purpose, on the other hand, is untouchable. It moves quietly, decisively, and relentlessly forward, and it doesn't need anyone's approval to succeed. Leading with purpose means your actions are driven by goals, vision, and intention rather than by reactions to others' opinions. You stopped measuring your steps against what people expected or thought about you. You stopped feeding the narrative that others tried to impose. Every decision became strategic, every effort meaningful, and every boundary intentional. And the difference was immediately visible, not because you broadcasted it, but because your results spoke louder than their assumptions ever could. People who once thought they had leverage over you began to realize that they had no influence on your direction. Their attempts to distract, provoke, or manipulate you fell flat because your focus was no longer on them. It was on the bigger picture, the long game, and the life you were building for yourself. They expected a reaction, but what they got was momentum. They expected noise, but what they got was clarity. And that clarity is devastating for anyone who thought they could control your story. Leading with purpose also transforms your presence. You become magnetic, authoritative, and undeniably powerful, not because you dominate or confront, but because everything you do is aligned with a vision that's bigger than any petty challenge. People notice the difference immediately. They see someone operating on a higher level, unbothered by distractions, untethered by expectations, and unstoppable in their trajectory. When you start leading with purpose, you stop competing for relevance and start creating influence that cannot be ignored. You don't just remind people who runs this, you make it impossible for them to forget. You are no longer reactive, defensive, or distracted. You are intentional, strategic, and dominant, and that is a level of power no one can challenge. Conclusion. What all of this comes down to is simple, but few truly grasp it. Power isn't about winning arguments, proving points, or reacting to every slight. Real power is quiet, deliberate, and impossible to manipulate. It's about reclaiming control over your own story, refusing to feed narratives that aren't yours, and rising above people who underestimated you at every turn. You didn't just survive the challenges, the betrayals, or the distractions. You transformed every obstacle into leverage, every setback into a skill, and every expectation into fuel for your growth. You stopped reacting to chaos and started creating order. You replaced anger with understanding, distractions with focus, and validation from others with belief in yourself. You stopped running someone else's race and began leading your own journey with purpose and precision. You outpaced their imagination, moved silently but decisively, and became untouchable in ways they never expected. Every time they thought they had you figured out, you reminded them they had been underestimating a version of yourself that they couldn't even comprehend. This isn't about arrogance, it's about mastery. Mastery of your energy, your choices, and your presence. It's about refusing to let anyone else dictate your value or define your story. You became too disciplined, too strategic, too evolved to be controlled by petty expectations, empty validation, or outdated assumptions. In every move, every decision, and every silent boundary, you reminded them who really runs this. And the truth is, the more you embrace this mindset, the more unstoppable and untouchable you become. So own your power, honor your growth, and never apologize for moving on your own terms. Let your life, actions, and evolution speak louder than anyone's assumptions ever could. You've already proven that victory isn't in their hands. It's in yours, and it always has been. If this resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Every step you take in claiming your power matters, and together we're building a community that refuses to be underestimated. Stay blessed always.